Michael J.
Nice seeing you this past weekend at Players Tour Phoenix.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice seeing you out there competing, and then obviously both the Players Tour and the Grand Prix. And the Players Tour, it's interesting. This one had some of the vibes reminded me a little bit of U.S. Nationals.
Because of this, I mean, the split format is similar to...
Well, no, the split format, every Pro Tour has done that for a decade.
Yeah, for years. That's
not the part. The part that reminds me of U.S. Nationals is the whole it being merged with another convention in the same room and it having nobody from Europe or Asia.
Oh, yeah, that is true. Now that I think about it, it was, I mean, not nobody. There were some, like, South American players of note. There were...
Yeah, but none of the South American... Some of the South American players of note were not from Europe or Asia. Obviously, the people from Canada wouldn't play in U.S. Nationals, and obviously the people from Brazil, but that's not... On the whole, I just mean that it was a different mix of people a little bit,
That's a good point, yeah. So there were some East Asian players. I played against one of them, but not like... If you think about the Japanese superstars, none of them were in attendance on this one.
It also, the experience that there was back in the day when U.S. nationals, French nationals, Japanese nationals, they're all like different tournaments, but they're going on in a relatively tight band.
Yeah.
That was part of what it was like, too, because there was literally just two major tournaments of the same format the previous week. And so, like, this week, it was sort of like going in, people knew that, first of all, knew that Inverter Delirium was a defining deck. And as, we talked about on the show last week, I was pretty sure that Breach was the other big pillar. And if I had, more preparation, either Breach or Inverter would have been good calls. Although I do think the Sultai Delirium deck is solid.
Yeah, I actually this might not be a popular take. I think that Pioneer's in a decent place. I don't think they need to do very much about it. I don't mind
0%.
I know that is what is going to happen. Okay,
and rightfully so, dude.
All right, where do you want to start? The broken deck that only managed to finish second in the hands of one of the top 5 players of all time.
Well, we could, but I mean, there's also the broken deck that finished first. We might as well start there, right? Like it was the deck to beat for the tournament and ended up, despite being the deck of the week last week, was the deck of the week this week too.
So you are talking, of course, about Dimir Inverter in the hands of Players Tour champion Corey Burkhart.
Yeah, after a rocky 2-3 start on day one, he popped off 13 hot ones in a row and walked away with his first Pro Tour, Players Tour win, whatever you want to call it. Awesome showing, playing a Dimir Inverter deck. Nothing too crazy, just the perfectly tuned list. He played 1 Omen of the Sea, 1 Hero's Downfall.
Man,
this is the perfect
downfall.
Mix. 2 Censor, 2 Drown in the Lock, 2 Thought Erasure, nothing too crazy there. But no, it's the 1 Omen of the Sea and 1 Hero's Downfall. That's the final touch. And then the other thing is his sideboard having a diverse mix of alternate plans. 3 Pack Rats, a Jace Vryn's Prodigy, a Kalidas Trader of Get, for a good mix of alternate ways to kind of take over the game. And then 1 Languish, 1 Legion's End, 1 Witch's Vengeance for some various sweeping action.
So
very importantly, 2 Damping Spheres, which I guess we'll get to later.
Yeah, talk to me about Witch's Vengeance. So this card is 1 BB.
I played it too.
Yeah, so it's got a special place in the metagame, right? It's not just a weirdo 1 less than a Languish for a lot less than a Languish, right? It has a very particular function.
Well, I mean, the most attractive part of it is to name spirits.
Oh.
But there are a lot of other modes. I mean, the Spirit deck is one of the top 5 decks, and it's pretty strong. And it can be kind of annoying after sideboarding for a deck like this. It's got access to things like Spell Queller and the counterspells of sorts of Disdainful Strokes and Mystical Disputes and all sorts of stuff. So having access to such a powerful targeted sweeper That's importantly cheap enough to not be able to be countered by Disdainful Stroke.
Yeah, that's important. Because I think that the difference between Spirits and like Azorius Control for the Inverter deck is like the Spirits deck is putting them on a clock, and it's a pretty meaningful clock, right? Like you get a couple Lords down, it doesn't take very long for them to win. You know, if you're playing against Azorius Control, not that you want to play a long game against Azorius Control, but if you find yourself in that situation, you can at least be in a spot where, you can string together a couple of Thought Seizes and then, jam them up on mana and get there that way.
And definitely. And you don't always know how long of a clock you're going to have either. That's part of it. Like the fact they have so many flash creatures, it's just important not to fall too far behind in the race.
Yep.
It's also just having some cheap interaction. Like, I know it's not necessarily ideal, but like when you're playing against, say you're playing against Mono Red, they could easily have a surprising number of humans,
Let me think about that. So
Abbot of Carroll Keep, Monastery Swift Spear, Soul Scar Mage. There's a lot of humans they could possibly have.
When I play against this kind of deck, they always draw their one Kalitas and their one Languish, but you're right, one Witch's Vengeance would also mess me up.
So the big thing though, having access to 2 Damping Spheres. Before even Damping Sphere, there's the 3 Pack Rats, and I think Pack Rat was a real smart plan for this weekend.
Multiple Pack Rats, yeah. Like, people don't get, like, because the second Pack Rat might be meaningful just because it's 2 instead of 3, right? Like, you can make as many Pack Rats as you want for 3, but, jam that mana in. It's big.
Yeah, the big thing, though, is just having access to Pack Rat consistently. Because this deck just wants to be able to stick a threat underneath somebody who's playing a lot of permission and then just start riding that. I think this deck is real strong. I think it's very distorting. I think that a lot of decks that people think are decks right now are not playable because of how much they just are not really going to be able to interact with this deck. And I think it's too constraining on the format. It's not like you have to put a bunch of pieces in play that can be disrupted the same way. When you Inverter, your deck is empty. All you have to do is just stick the win condition, right? Yeah. And obviously, in theory, Jace could be killed in response, but there's not very many cards that can do that. And Thassa's Oracle just wins when you have no cards in your deck.
If you have 0 cards in your deck, that's right.
Right, which is not hard to set up. This deck, the other thing
sometimes
people don't
they set
consider,
you up, right?
The other thing that people don't consider is how much once you Inverter, your deck is like stocked. Every card in your deck is like a win. You can Inverter when you don't have the combo. Because, like, as long as you have, like, a Thassa's Oracle or a Jace in your graveyard, then you'll draw it.
True story.
So I think this deck is just too deterministic and invalidates so many strategies.
So I think a lot of kind of 2-card combo decks in the past, and this is like a weird, like, alternate 2-card combo because it can be Inverter and Thassa or Inverter and Jace. At least did you the courtesy of being full of bad cards, but there's not a bad card in this 75. Like the entire starting 60, like every one of the cards in the starting 60 outside of the card Inverter of Truth sees regular play in other archetypes. Every single one.
And the Inverter of Truth is a 6/6 flyer for 4 that gives you a ton of selection.
Yeah, it's not a friendly deck.
The other thing to call out, though, is the evolution, and a bunch of other people did this too this week, but it wasn't really popping last week. It's the 1 copy of Ipnu Rivulet. Relatively low opportunity cost, just gives you a little added flexibility. You can either Ipnu Rivulet yourself so that you can get to the bottom of your deck faster so that you can win with the Thassa's Oracle or Jace. Like when you Inverter, sometimes you'll just Inverter and have 6 cards in your deck or 5 cards or whatever. The other thing you can do is you can just have Ipnu Rivulet in play, and when your opponent won't necessarily be able to Inverter because you could just, they plan on doing inverter, untap, draw, play Jace or something like that. Mm-hmm. But you're threatening to just kill them because on their upkeep, you could, just like they inverter, you could just rivulet, mill their whole deck, and then they die on their draw step.
Yep.
So it's a relatively low opportunity cost card that gives you some tactical options. It's kind of the second Omen of the Sea is the other thing about it.
Yeah,
that's part of it.
Ibni Rivulet was played in multiple archetypes this past weekend also, including weird spots where decks needed to count how many islands they had. So I thought that was a cool piece of tech. Folks, certainly Corey thought it was worth the investment in a little bit of life for a lot of potential extra wins.
The other deck of the tournament obviously was Lotus Breach, which I believe had the best win percentage of the weekend. Highest finisher, obviously, Hall of Famer and one of the greatest players of all time, William Jensen, who finished second with a Lotus Breach deck that the biggest, I think, piece of tech here, the biggest evolution of the archetype is the taking off of the training wheels. You see, Huey did not play with Thassa's Oracle and didn't have a Jace in the main deck. You see, these decks in the past have typically played at least one copy of one of those two cards in the main deck.
Yep.
And part of that is that obviously you can Fae of Wishes for one out of the sideboard, and here William Jensen has a Jace in his sideboard. But a lot of people play Slaughter games, including main deck. And if somebody Slaughter games your Fae of Wishes, what's your plan? First of all, there's a little bit of the whole Drain Life thing going on. People don't go after your Fae of Wishes that often because of how much they know you should have a kill card. But then in this tournament, you actually can see people's main deck lists. So that's not going to be enough. So the question is, what is it? Is it really just Fae of Wishes? Is it really just Vizier of Tumbling Sands Beatdown?
No.
And the answer is no. It's Expansion Explosion. The one copy of Expansion Explosion can be used to actually kill. It's not just that you can set up a spot with hidden strings and pour over the pages where you're untapping, Thespian Stage copies of Lotus Field and making a lot of mana. That does work. But the other thing you can do is you can just do a little Expansion Explosion for like 7, do a bunch of damage, draw a huge amount of cards so that you're just completely in control, and then you can just use Underworld Breach to Expansion Explosion your opponent again.
Yeah, you just do it a bunch of times. I don't think that, given the potentially, I'm going to use the word infinite nature of Underworld Breach, Expansion
Well, it's not that infinite. You can't do that many. You do have to exile a lot of cards. You can't. It's not anywhere close to infinite, right? It's a lot.
How about highly repeatable?
Highly repeatable is very fair.
Highly repeatable and also highly resilient, right? So if somebody's going to try to get you with hand destruction or something like that, they really need something along the lines of a Slaughter games that would remove, exile all of your ways to win. Because if something's in the graveyard, just the very nature of the deck is that you can get it back.
Another big card that was actually one of the keys to winning a lot of the matches was the one copy of Ugin the Spirit Dragon in the sideboard.
Yep.
Ugin is another high leverage way to convert these weird spots where you're not actually going off, but you can make a bunch of mana. You've got a Thespian Stage that's copied to Lotus Field, and you can untap it with a Vizier or a Hidden Strings or a Pour Over the Pages or something. And so when you're in a spot like that, sometimes you won't be able to go off because you won't have an Underworld Breach, but you'll just be able to make a bunch of mana. And if you Fae of Wishes for Ugin, that completely takes over a lot of games. Yeah. Plus, it's kind of a Swiss Army knife that can just solve a lot of unusual problems.
It's actually very, very well positioned. So I played against Breach decks a bunch of times in the Grand Prix, and I was playing Mono Red. And I won all of them, but one of the games that I lost actually was really interesting. Where and I think Ugin is extraordinarily well positioned in this case. So predictably, I had Eidolon of the Great Revel, and so he was pretty constrained in terms of what he can do. But I'm also dealing a lot of damage to myself. So he can do, Fae of Wishes into Ugin. Neither of those cards triggers Eidolon. On the other hand, I'm damaging myself to try to get him down, right? So when he plays Ugin, he can sweep all available Eidolons for, the -X ability, doesn't take any damage, and then the weird thing is Ugin can nug for 3 every turn. The red deck that you're playing against has probably just dealt 6 to themselves or something, trying to get you down, and so it's actually a deceptively fast clock.
God, I love how much everything is through the lens of mono red, no matter how unplayable it might be. It's always, what would it be like to be playing some Lava Spike deck?
Hey, I wish I could play Lava Spike. I played 2 different kinds of just shock this past weekend. It was still pretty good. But I think the point being, there are many tools that the mono red deck has that are pretty good against this archetype, and I think that some players chose to play it because they thought it was good against the combo decks this weekend.
Sure. A couple things to point out about the sideboard here that are really clever. 2 Anger of the Gods as sweepers, no surprise there, but if you notice, none of his lands make red besides Lotus Field. I mean, I guess there's 1 Sheltered Thicket. And then you're like, okay, well, what about these 2 Supreme Verdicts? None of his lands make white except Lotus Field. And what about this Thought Distortion? None of his lands make black. And the answer is just 4 Lotus Fields and 4 Sylvan Scryings and 4 Strategic Plannings. It's enough. And
you're not going to win
really
many
good
games
about,
if you don't have access to the Lotus Field, though. So I think it's a reasonable assumption.
Totally, but it also hides what you're up to a little bit. Because if you got no black mana showing and you go get Thought Distortion, not everybody's going to know that's coming, particularly if you're playing in a tournament where deck lists aren't open. Like most tournaments.
So I had an interesting conversation with Sam Black about this archetype in particular, and it's funny because we'll get there eventually. But there are some really good players chose to play Azorius Control this past weekend. Andrew Cuneo was one of them. One made top 8 of the Players Tour even. And Sam asked me, "Is it possible for Azorius Control to win Game 1?" And I said, of course it must be possible. And he said, describe it to me. And then I was reminded of the conversation that we had where I said, hey, I think that, Gideon can potentially be a thing that will at least slow down the Lotus Breach deck. And you're like, describe it to me. And I came to realize I don't think Azorius Control can ever beat this deck Game 1.
Oh, yeah, it can. It totally. Super, super easy. Okay, you be Sam Black in this spot.
All right.
I don't think you don't think Azorius Control could ever win. I think it could. And you want to know how?
I thought it could before too. Yeah, sure. What do you think?
Okay, so the Lotus Breach deck can't keep its opener, just doesn't have any land.
Yeah.
So Mulligans can't keep that one either, doesn't have any land.
Yeah.
So maybe it ends up keeping like a 4 or 5 card draw, right?
Yeah.
And it needs to draw to get there. But it does. But the Azorius deck comes out really aggressive. They come out really aggressive. They just put down Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, on turn 5.
Yeah.
And start locking out the Lotus Breach deck before it can even get going. In fact, they might just put Elspeth down, Elspeth Sun's Nemesis down on turn 4, minus twice, and then just do 2, and then 4, 4, 4, 4. And at that point, the whole being mana screwed and being down a whole bunch of cards from triple mulliganing,
that matters a lot.
It could potentially matter. And if all that happens, I think there's at least like modest chances that a blue-white control deck that has main deck graveyard hate, such as Austin Bursevich's Soul Guide Lantern.
Yep.
I don't think it's good. It's like got to be 9-10.
I think 9-10 is generous.
I think that decks fail sometimes, man. Maybe it's 93. I don't know. You don't think I could win 1 out of 10 against you? I'm playing Azorius Control.
I think you could win
Game 1.
More than 1 out of 10 against me. We used to play Mental Magic and not play any cantrips, and you would beat me. But I think let's just talk about the deck list instead of the deficiencies of my character as a Lotus Breach player. I'm just saying I think it's real tough if the Lotus Breach deck is just like, tell you what I'm going to do, bud. I'm just going to like draw some Thespian stages, get like one Lotus Field and just do nothing for a while. And then I'm just going to have like, I don't know, 3 Lotus Fields in play. And then we're going to see how many times you can try to counter my Fae of Wishes, because if any of them resolve, I win the game immediately. I think that's...
You don't win the game immediately. You just make me discard my entire hand.
Yep, I do. I do that.
Yeah. Which is not great for me, but that's not the same as winning, because you could be behind on board against a Teferi.
All right. Respect.
Either way, it doesn't matter. It's a blowout.
At above 90%. Yes.
I would never play a deck like this.
Azorius Control?
It's too reactive in this format. I mean, with Breach and Inverter the way they are, you can do well enough against Inverter, definitely. But you're not really going to beat a Breach deck. I don't think you're going to win enough after sideboarding.
Against Breach?
I don't think you'll win enough, not to make up for the fact that you've got real slim chances game one.
It's not good. Like, even if you just had like started with Damping Sphere in play.
You have 2 Damping Spheres, an extra Soul Guide Lantern. You got some cards that are good. If you draw the Damping Sphere, you're in real good shape. But that's, I mean,
you would side that's going to be like true. The vetoes and the disputes, right? And the H. Of
course, I would sideboard everything. But who cares?
What do you think about this deck in the abstract? Like, let's not talk about it specifically.
So reactive. Yeah. It's so reactive. It could be fine as a metagame call, but I don't think it's the right deck for a format with Lotus Breach in it.
Yeah, I actually don't like this build very much. It has like 1 absorb. I don't know. It's slow to win game 1, even if it's way ahead, right? Like it's got
I would play a Dream Trawler main deck.
Just to,
if you were going to play this, which I don't think you should, so it's kind of a weird point, but
yeah.
I also think it's a little fancy.
What's fancy about it?
Okay, so like 8 Planeswalkers, 3 Dig Through Time. I don't believe it's not right to play 4 Dig Through Time in this deck. And then I happen to think Azorius Charm is a little overrated, but that's not the biggest sin. And I think this mix of counterspells, 1 Absorb and 3 Sinister Sabotage is so many 3-mana counterspells. And then a Soul Guide Lantern, 1 token piece of interaction there. And like, even if you're playing as somebody fast, it's like you've got 1 Seal Away and 4 Azorius Charm. You're just so crutching on the Supreme Verdicts. Yeah, so I don't know. This deck doesn't do it for me.
Can get the wrong draw against Beatdown for sure.
I like it against Sultai Delirium, though. I guess. I don't know. It's weird, though, because it's not like you're even good against Emrakul.
Like, I think this deck is weird. Like, if it's playing against Dimir Inverter, I think that, like, if it goes to, like, turn 7 or something, this deck has a really, really high likelihood of winning. But there's just so many games where they're just, like, all the Thought Seizes and Thought Erasures in, like, the first 4 turns, and they're just like, all right, I just got you. Because the counterspells are so clunky. Right? Like, how are you going to stop them from just getting you?
Yeah, I also just think that this deck, I think he's just cheating on cheap interaction and plays. You know, there's a lot of these mid-range plays, but if you're just bashing Teferis and, powerful cards like Dig Through Time and Teferi and Elspeth and Narset and Supreme Verdict, that's going to be good for some kind of like grinding matchup. But if you're trying to go fast, whether it's like mono red aggro or one of these combo decks, specifically in particular the Breach deck that isn't as predictable as the Inverter deck, I just think that I think he's cheating on too much on cheap plays, on early game plays.
Yeah. Not a fan of Azorius Control for the metagame that we were walking into this past weekend. After they ban a bunch of cards, who knows?
Yeah, definitely. I think that if the tools exist in this format, you can make the deck good against a couple different types of classes. You just don't have as much raw power as some of the decks, so you have to really line it up right in the metagame, Well, you have to really have the right answers because you're just not getting to play with as many overpowered cards. Dig Through Time and Teferi are pretty overpowered, but a lot of the cards in this deck are very modest, like Azorius Charm and Seal Away and Sinister Sabotage. It's not the most powerful cards of the format.
Yeah.
Mono Red, near and dear to your heart, of course, actually was a respectable choice for this weekend. And I think part of that is that Mono Red was one of the very, very few strategies that actually was respectable against Breach game one.
Yeah.
You could just race the Mono Red deck. And as we discussed last week, fast Mono Red proved to be the better way to do it rather than big Mono Red. And Zachary Kind's fourth place list, no 5-drops, and trimming all the way down to just 2 Torbran, Thane of Redfell, and 1 Chandra. So just a much lower to the ground. Still, a pretty good amount of sustain. The 4 Rabble Master, 4 Bone Crusher Giant, on top of having 4 Abbot of Carroll Keep and a lot of business lands. You got some juice, right? But I think this is a smart way to build Mono Red for the most part. Yeah. I respect anybody who has 4 Wild Slash and a Shock. Okay, now I will take you seriously. If you had 3 Wild Slash, I would take you seriously. If you have any number of those things besides 4, I can take you seriously. And so I think when you have 4 Wild Slash, 1 Shock, I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt. That makes me believe that 5 could possibly be the right number. It's like a Mount Everest thing. Like Mount Everest. Mount Everest's elevation? It's like it's popularly, so it's like listed everywhere as being 26,002 feet, right? It's like it's currently, I believe, listed actually at 29. Yeah, it's 29,029 feet. But at the time, at one point, it was listed at 29,002 feet because it's like nobody would believe, like they actually estimate it at exactly 29,000. But nobody would know what degree of how many significant digits there were. So they just added 2 extra feet in order to convey that it really is like this,
Yeah, I got to say, I'm happy to see Mono Red in the top 8 of the Players' Tour, and of course Mono Red won the Grand Prix, but I don't love this build at all.
No?
No.
Why?
Multiple
What
things.
Is it you don't want? Okay, what is it you don't like about it?
First of all, there are 3 copies of Eidolon of the Great Revel in the sideboard. I mean, you have to have some level of confidence to play 3 copies of Eidolon of the Great Revel.
Admittedly, I would play 4.
Like, not only is that I aggressively mulligan hands to Eidolon of the Great Revel against Breach, but it's a card that comes in a variety of matchups. Like, if you're on the play against...
But that's one card.
Yeah, but on the play against Spirits, like, it's important to winning the Spirits race. So
sure, but we're in agreement. Like, it's you could totally just play another one. It's not like you didn't play them. You're just disagreeing about 3 versus 4.
Yeah.
What do you not like about the build at a structural level? Somebody could just add a 4th Eidolon.
I don't like the 4s at all. Chandra and Torbran. I think it's just better to not play them, to play like 2 fewer lands, a couple more burn spells. I think like Torbran's like real. It's real fancy against people who don't have legitimate creature removal. Like, sometimes you get other red decks because you have it, and sometimes you have a 4 casting cost card in your hand. Don't hit your 4th land drop on turn 4 because you have a 22 land deck with no light up the stage, and they just kill you, right? Like, I think like we're playing in a format where the top end of the format, like the Inverter decks, the Sultide Delirium deck, the Breach deck, are all just relentless murderers. They're like horrible people to be across the table from in terms of like how deadly they can be. And like, this deck has no way to regulate its draw, and it has a bunch of 4s.
It had 4 Abbot of Carroll Keep.
That card is not very good at...
No, it regulates the draw. That's a way of regulating the draw.
So,
and 1 Chandra.
The Chandra is part of the problem. This is a 22 land deck that has high leverage forecasting cost spells that are only good some of the time. Like, I think, like, you just have to be in a situation where all your cards are good in every matchup.
Okay,
If
so
you're playing this kind of a deck.
So you're not playing any X1s, right?
X1s. You mean
like creatures with one toughness besides Rimrock Knight, which is a virtual spell, or Abbot of Carrow Keep, or anything else with prowess, because you can fight through.
I played Abbot and Runaway Steamkin, both of which can gain additional toughness. If that's
okay, then that's fine too. I just think it's important to not play, like, for instance, a 1-mana 2/1 or something. And the reason, and that's part of why I liked this build too, is 4 Monastery Swiftspear, 2 toughness, 4 Soulscar Mage, 2 toughness, 2 Zergo Bellstriker, so to get your sly mana curve there, 2 toughness. And the reason that's so important is because of the ubiquity of Satyr Wayfinder.
Oh, I thought you were just going to say you don't want to get blown out by Goblin Chain Whirler, which also...
No! I think it's great that he didn't play Goblin Chain Whirler.
No. 1 toughness guys get blown out by Goblin Chain Whirler, that's all.
I know, and I'm not worried about Goblin Chain Whirler because I don't think people should be playing it. It's not like that many people are even playing red in the first place, but there are a lot of people playing Satyr Wayfinder.
Yes. Satyr Wayfinder is very good against this deck in many ways.
The other thing is that a bunch of the spirits are disproportionately good against 2/1s. And so having access to a mix of threats that don't get beat by 1/3s, for instance, I like it.
I agree. I just want to hurl an apology out to the Magic universe. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a card that was revealed in a recent set, and that card's name is Stomp/Bone Crusher Giant, and I told you I thought that it was overrated by the internet. My God, was I wrong.
That card is unbelievable.
This card is so good. I mean, I would just be like, oh, I would look at my hand, and I didn't know what my matchup was, and I was like, oh, I drew Bone Crusher Giant. I think I'm probably going to win. Like, that was like, and my mindset is just like, stomp you end of turn on turn 2 on a slow draw, untap 4/3 is good a lot of the time. It's insane to me to say that, but it's like so good against fair decks. Like, people can't even get through it because their guy is too small. Like, it's so great. If you draw 2, oh my gosh.
Okay, so here's another way to think of it. Stomp is like Think Twice, but you draw a 0-mana shock that makes it so that damage can't be prevented, right? Then the Bone Crusher Giant is a 0-mana 4/3 that if it becomes the target of a spell, it does 2 damage to that spell's controller. Like, compare this card to Think Twice, which you are all about.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. I think the card's good.
Yeah, it's so good. So Zvi played the mono blue deck that Sam Black designed, and he was talking about playing Master of Waves, right? And I was just like, hey, you can't be too leaning too hard on Master of Waves. And he's like, why? And then his just eyes open up. He's like, oh my God, you have Bone Crusher Giant. And he's like, I can't even block with my best blocker because Bone Crusher Giant exists.
It's risky.
Yeah, it's real risky.
Because remember, obviously you can't use Stomp on the Master Waves, but if you stomp anything, including their face, it makes it so the protection from red won't save the Master of Waves in combat.
Yeah, so all the prowess guys will just beat it in a fight, which is crazy. And so this card is so fantastic. I'm sorry I ever said anything about it other than it's my new second favorite creature.
And the damage can't be prevented this turn aspect of Wild Slash means that you actually have a lot of this effect. And part of it is that normally these red decks have trouble coming up with 4 power creatures, but this list actually has Abbot of Carrow Keep, which can do it, Bone Crusher Giant, which free rolls it, Goblin Rabble Master can do it under the right circumstance, which is often when you need it most. And then Rimrock Knight can do it at just the right moment.
Yeah.
And that's obviously also in weird spots. Castle Embereth could help, but it doesn't really ever matter. That's not the thing. I guess Soulscar Mage could really do it, but it never really happens either.
It happens. It's not. I mean, it happens if you have Rimrock Knight, but
that's
Rimrock
true.
Knight does it anyway.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Rimrock Knight and just Rimrock Knight himself in Castle Embereth is a way to do
that's
it.
fair. Yep, that's fair. So you're not into this deck, huh?
No.
Did you play Chain Whirler?
No. I played.
Well, what else did you even play different?
I played Robber of the Rich and Runaway Steamkin in my main deck, and
a lot of twos.
Light up the stage. Those
a lot of card advantage. So much grinding in your list.
Yeah, I mean, depends. Like,
those are good cards.
They're all really good. So the thing about Robber the Rich is, after I saw this deck and the deck that won the Grand Prix, I thought maybe I would have actually rather had Rimrock Knight than Robber the Rich. But Robber the Rich, when he's going,
I would definitely play Rimrock Knight.
He's really good. Like I had a turn where I just like took my opponent's Heart of Girapur and like enchanted it with Ensoul Artifact the same turn. He's just like, I mean, obviously it's stories like that make you play a card, but it's real disproportionately good on the play. So the thing is that I'd say that almost every deck wants to play first in most matchups, but the red deck loses more. The one that I played rather loses more percentage losing the roll than the average deck because Robber is so much worse on the draw. But there's like a lot of cool stuff can happen. Like you just attack into spirits one time, and you can flip over a Nibelgest Herald or a Spell Queller, and then like they have to only take actions during your pre-combat main phase because like if they ever try to take an action after that, you always have them cold. So there's just stuff like that's pretty interesting, and I mean, those are advantages to Robber of the Rich, but it doesn't speak to the opportunity cost. No, I do think that if I had played the same tournaments again, I'd deeply consider playing Rimrock Knight. It's like Robber was very good for me sometimes, and it was medium other times.
Would you play Mono Red again?
Yes, I thought it was very. I
mean, it's fine. It's just. Isn't Breach and Inverter so broken?
Yeah, I don't know. I think Mono Red is a good deck. It's obviously not on the percentage maybe as good as some of the other decks, but I feel very satisfied playing it. I like playing it, and when stuff works out, then I feel good. I mean, I think
that's good.
It's much worse, I think, to lose with Mono Red than some the other decks because you often feel really helpless when you're losing with Mono Red. Like Breach is just still capable of taking actions, right? Like usually when Mono Red loses, it's because you just drew a whole bunch of mountains in a row, and there's nothing you can do about that. Like other decks that are really powerful, like Breach and Inverter and even Azorius Control, can do all kinds of things to mitigate their losing in these ways, and like give yourself options where a deck that's just peeling cards off the top of their deck is just going to lose. So there's a whole class of games that you lose playing Mono Red that other decks don't necessarily lose. But I don't know. That's for me. I think I would play it again. I enjoyed playing it. I thought my list was very good, and like I did pretty well in the Grand Prix. Not well enough, but pretty good. And those are large tournaments, so you got to lose some of the time, and sometimes it's your own fault.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Sometimes it's not though, and I think you play the Mono Red decks well, so I can't blame you. It's a solid choice, all things considered.
I tossed at least one match in the Grand Prix, but thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean Mono Red in general. Like some percentage of the time you're going to punt. But what did you think of Jacob Wilson's update to Sultai Delirium? He didn't exactly reinvent the wheel here, but instead of the third Jace, he's got a Brain Maggot for a little extra early interaction. And then instead of the second Grizzly Salvage, he has a fourth Traverse the Ulvenwild. And then he's got a second Murderous Rider instead of the second Nissa who shakes the world. He also has an Ipnu Rivulet for Spice.
Well, it's not just for Spice because he has Traverse the Ulvenwald, right? Oh, that's only
Yeah. But so what?
I mean, he can get it, right?
The more important thing is that he can get it into his graveyard, and he can target himself so that he can get a big enough graveyard that his Uro can come back or his Emrakul can be cheaper.
Yeah.
You're not really traversing for the Rivulet very often.
But I'm just saying, it's a doable move.
It's legal. It's just not that relevant.
Yeah, I don't know. Like decks like this, which are like so bullet heavy, it's just fundamentally an answer deck, right? I mean, I think that a lot of them are real contingent on what you're playing against. If you're playing against more combo decks, then an extra Brain Maggot is better than an extra Jace. If you're playing against opposing control decks, an extra Jace is probably much better than Brain Maggot.
No, I don't know. The Brain Maggot is still pretty darn good.
Yeah, you love the Brain Maggot?
I don't know that I love it, but I might like it enough. So I played a list similar to this, obviously derivative of Yoel Larson's Sultai Delirium deck, and I played 3 Jace, but if I were to, if I knew then what I know now, I think I would play 1 Brain Maggot and 2 Jace. It would have been better. The second Murderous Rider, I think that's also an improvement. I cut the second Nissa also. I arrived at the same spot, but I played an Ashiok, which was solid. I do think the second Murderous Rider would have been better, so I like that move Jacob made better as well. And then I played 2 Grizzly Salvage and 3 Traverse like Yoel, but in retrospect, I do think that 4 Traverse, 1 Grizzly Salvage would have been better. So I agree with all of Jacob's moves compared to mine. He played 2 Forest, 1 Island. I played 2 Island, 1 Forest. I don't think it would matter that much. And then instead of the new Rivulet, I just had an extra duel. Don't think it mattered too much.
How many opulent palace did you play?
Just the 1. That's what I played instead of the new Rivulet. Yeah. And I wasn't a fan of it, but everybody said to play it. It was fine. It didn't really matter. I would just err on the side of Jacob Wilson's new Rivulet instead. But the other thing, though, so I like his main deck enough, like all the different choices I like enough, that it makes me want to err on the side of his sideboard. The part that's interesting is the 3 Unmoored Ego. I didn't have any of this type of effect. I had damping, the damping sphere. If I had Unmoored Ego, it would have worked out real well for me. Relatively speaking, I mean, the matchups I faced out of my 5 Pioneer opponents, 3 of them were playing Blue-Black Inverter, and it would have been great to have Unmoored Ego. It would have been really, 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 really great. If
you have Unmoored Ego against Inverter, what card do you typically? Assume you're going to resolve it. What card are you going to name?
I would name Inverter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't think they're going to win playing on the merits.
Yeah, you can't
go after.
It's a bad control deck, right? If you name an Inverter,
right, horrible control deck. It's so hard for them to win. Whereas you can't really go after the Oracle or the Jace; they have too many copies of both. And most people, and beforehand, whether they have access to any of that like Eldrazi stuff that lets them get something else. But really what happens is after sideboarding, they're going to board in all their alternate plans. So you just got to be ready for Pack Rat and whatever else they might have, Colitis. But they just don't have that many threats. And if you're playing on the merits, you're talking about a deck that has access to multiple Murderous Riders, Emrakul, Ishkana, Tireless Tracker, Courser, Uro. You can just beat people on the merit,
Yeah, you have all good cards. But the thing is, Unmoored
Ego... It's all about getting Jace. Not Jace, Inverter.
See, Unmoored Ego is a sideboard card, though, right? Like, you're talking about bringing it in a situation where they're going to have, like, a variety... They might bring in their Colitis. They might bring in, their Pack Rat. They might bring in Planeswalkers, right? Like, Unmoored Ego gets so much less leverage in those games because it's not going to close them out by itself.
It doesn't need to. You see, if you hit the Inverter, you take away the degenerate part of their deck. A Pack Rat, you can just beat a Pack Rat. Your cards are so good.
Yeah, all right.
If you're just playing fair, you get so much card advantage from Courser of Kruphix, Tireless Tracker, Uro, Jace, even the implied value.
Yeah, it's kind of
Emrakul can devastate them. Murderous Rider, Walking Ballista, it's nothing. Like, you even have Planeswalkers. They are not equipped to fight you fair.
Yeah, I guess 1 Uro beats however many pack rats they make, right?
Yeah, they're not.
A lot of rats.
Yeah, it's right. Yeah, like pack rat is like. Don't get me wrong. It's a thing. You do actually have to play the game, but like it's a lot more effective against somebody who isn't just dominating the board the way that this deck does. So if I were to do it again, I would try Jacob Wilson's approach. That said, I do think that you're going to really struggle against Breach without Damping Sphere.
So I was a big, just from observing and playing against the archetype, I was a fan of the card Grizzly Salvage. I like the Grizzly Salvage Satyr Wayfinder aspect to the deck. And what do you think about just playing like more cards like Grizzly Salvage? And obviously there's already 4 Satyr Wayfinders. And then cutting down on all the weird bullets.
No. Too much air.
Yeah.
The bullets are all great. I went and got every single bullet. It was like the amount of different times I went and got stuff. I got Tracker on occasion, Ooze on occasion, Ballista on occasion. Like, it really, you just go get the stuff. Right. Even though like 1 Liliana was so good for me, being able to just have a second way to access Emrakul when things stretch, or when you're flipping stuff, having an extra way. Plus, it has good types. So I think that, don't get me wrong. I could see playing 6 of that instead of 5. But the reason I would play the 4th Traverse instead of the 2nd Salvage if I were to do it again is just curve considerations. I just want to be even faster. I think that the format is, at least as long as they allow Inverter and Breach, it's so fast. You got to be a little quicker.
I lost to a deck in the Grand Prix, first round of day 2, that was a Sultai Delirium deck that had the Inverter combo also, and I don't think any deck like that made the big event top 8s. But what do you think about that kind of a hybrid deck? I thought it was really. I mean, obviously, I'm looking at this again from the purview of the mono red deck, but it feel like it just fixed the problems of the other deck. Each side fixed the, like, oh, I would have just beaten you if you were an Uro deck, but you have a degenerate 2-card combo. Or I would have just beaten you with your combo side, but you have all these tools.
Yeah, it might be better against mono red, but I think it's worse. The Dimir Inverter deck is just so much more consistent and plays with a higher card quality. So maybe it makes you better against mono red and some other weird decks and so on, but I think that against the field at large, Dimir Inverter is stronger, personally.
Fair enough.
But, I don't know. I could believe it the other way. It's just I think that it is unnecessarily fancy. It's really good about a backup plan, but I just don't think the cards are strong enough to make it so that you need to be so focused on the backup plan. But I don't know. What else did you like out of the tournament? I mean, obviously this was a tournament, really a 2-deck tournament at the tippity top. But
I think I think we covered all the important Pioneer decks last couple of weeks, including obviously the last 2 Players Tours and this one. There's only one other deck I think that we should really hit, which was the mono red deck that won the Grand Prix, which I think is meaningfully different than other mono red decks that have been out there. And it's different from all the decks that we've talked about in various contexts, and it was it's got a Satyr's Cunning. God bless him. a card I have often thought about, is my deck so bad I need to play this in draft? No, it's not that bad. But the Grand Prix winning deck in the Pioneer format has got a Satyr's Cunning in the main deck. This is a card I said I thought maybe I liked when we were kind of previewing Theros Beyond Death. What do you think about Ben White's Grand Prix champion red deck?
Well, I do think that if you're going to play it, 1's the right amount.
Yeah.
They have diminishing returns, the whole escape, exiling your graveyard in this way. In some ways it reminds me of the Miser's Grim Lavamancer. You have to really squint. a lot.
As someone who has played the Miser's Grim Lavamancer throughout his life, I can tell you these are not comparable cards. You land that Grim Lavamancer in some matchups like Humans or Affinity, and they just don't win anymore. I don't know about the Satyr's Cunning.
So, I personally like Zergo Bellstriker better than the Satyr's Cunning.
Yeah, a second one, like as was played in Zachary Keeney's deck.
Second of all, this list has 3 Obligators, 4 Rampaging Ferocidon, and 4 Bone Crusher Giant. I prefer 8 3-cost cards instead of 11. Next, if I'm going to play 3-cost cards, instead of Rampaging Ferocidon and Eldrazi Obligator, I think it's possible to do better. Additionally, 4 copies of Torbrand is a lot of 4s.
Yeah.
Additionally, this deck, instead of having cards that cost 2, it's got Kari Zev, that's it. I don't like that curve. Additionally, Kari Zev isn't the first or second card I would play.
At 2?
I don't want to play Kari Zev.
I didn't play any. I played one in the Pro Tour and then I cut it because it's not very good.
I know, and that's what I'm saying. It's not the first or second. I think you've got to play 2 different 2-drops.
Yeah.
I don't know. I maybe you don't, but I would play Rimrock Knight and Abbot at Carol Keep. I think it's good to play with 2-drops. Also, 4 wild/0 shock. I don't believe it. So no, I don't like this list. I think it's clever.
I think about
points for style.
4 Battlefield Forge no white cards.
You gotta keep them guessing.
Yeah, so you should at least play like a Shivan Reef and like a Karplusan Forest.
No, keep it all one color because then it helps sell the idea that you might actually have a white card. If you split it up, it becomes obvious.
Yeah.
You got to keep it all at one. And the reason that there's colorless mana, of course, is so that you have access to Eldrazi Obligator in the main, the colorless for kicking it, and Thought Knot Seer out of the sideboard. Fancy. Definitely fancy.
So you did not like this build as much as the build from Top 8 of the Players' Tour.
I love the build. I would recommend nobody play it.
I think that I appreciate its novelty. Right?
Yeah.
Like Eldrazi Obligator, he went deep. I'll give him that.
It's fine. So it's got an awesome ratio of even the stuff that's, I think, a worse something else.
Yeah.
Isn't by very much, and you might get some surprise value. I personally would go the other way on every single choice.
Same. What do you think about 0 copies of Eidolon of the Great Revel?
I would go the opposite way of that choice, too.
Same. I thought Eidolon of the Great Revel was one of the best cards that you could play if you were going to play mono red, and it was sad to see it not here. Ferocidon is a weird choice to me. I thought about playing it, but A, it's a 3/3 for 3, and B, I don't even look at when is it good?
Well, presumably after you've already got Bone Crusher Giant, Goblin Chain Whirler. No, you didn't play the Chain Whirler. That's why you just need to play with 3/3s for 3 that don't do anything.
It does something.
I don't know. Maybe if you just thought there was going to be a lot of Heliod in the format, it could be fine. But I don't think it does enough. It
is some resistance to Kalitas.
Yeah, definitely.
It's smaller, but it is some resistance.
Definitely.
I respect 4 Damping Sphere. Maybe you don't need Eidolon as much as if you have 4 Damping Sphere.
I would still play the Eidolon. I also just think putting too much into Damping Sphere is putting a lot of eggs in one basket.
Yeah, because of Ratchet Bomb. I guess Damping Sphere and Eidolon cost the same, though.
It's not about Ratchet Bomb. It's just about having that many artifacts that don't put pressure on your opponent.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's fine. I would go a different way, but it seems fine. About the Spirits deck. So Kyle Hendrickson top forward with Spirits. Nothing too crazy here. But it is the whole splash just for Collected Company. Archangel Avacyn, your girl, showing up in the sideboard.
Like it a lot.
+4 Kral Harpooner to dominate the mirror.
That is a sweet innovation. Got to give it to Kyle. There are 2 copies of Deputy of Detention in the main deck instead of Nibelgast Herald, which is obviously very different.
That's
I guess off of a Coco, like Deputy of Detention off of Coco might be really cool sometimes. Especially in the games where you go up to 4, which is after sideboarding. This deck has a lot of 187s, Patrick. You could have like deputies and Kral Harpooners after sideboarding. And they just like you could really mess somebody up, especially in the mirror match with those mid combat. I don't hate it.
What do you think of Permeating Mass, man? As a red player,
I have to read it because I don't know what this card does.
So it's green for a 1/3 spirit. When it deals combat damage to a creature, that creature becomes a copy of Permeating Mass.
Oh, so mine also become Permeating Masses?
Yep.
Weird. I don't know. I think that this is too good for my guys. Right? Isn't this for somebody with good guys?
Nah. What's your guys going to do?
1/3 for 1? Oh, it's just an insane blocker for 1.
Right.
Oh,
and it starts fixing your guys. If they don't die, they become 1/3 where they're not worth anything, and then he moves to the next one.
Yeah, so they no longer.
So he's a 1 mana. He's a 1 mana icy, but then he starts stripping everything of its abilities and turning it into a 1/3. And it's not like it ever gets to turn anything into a 1/3 because all of Hendrickson's creatures fly, for the most part.
This is I guess this would be super annoying. It's probably worse for like the stompy guys though, like people who like really have good creatures.
It's even better against them, sure, but the whole point though is just the amount that for 1 mana, this is like the best Arboreal Grazer ever.
I think that Huey and other people prove that Arboreal Grazer is the best Arboreal Grazer ever. Like if I looked at Permeating Mass, I'd be like, all right, that kind of stinks, but Soulscar Mage and a Shock, we can put this together. Arboreal Grazer, I'm like, oh no. Is he just going to breach me on turn 2? That's what I'm thinking, right? Yeah.
Rest is top 8. So many inverter decks.
Yeah, it's a super good deck. Obviously.
Prohibitively good, one might say.
Yeah. I only faced... I guess I faced the hybrid deck once, and I faced the regular one in the Players' Tour. Lost in 3 both times. So you played it more than I did, it sounds like.
I do think that... it's not surprising to me at all that 5-color Niv Mizzet did not show up. I think the deck is overrated. I think it's a bad Sultai Delirium deck.
Wow, them's fighting words.
It goes bigger, but I think it's just a little too ambitious for how dominant Inverter and Breach are.
Yeah, when you look at that deck, I think when PV played it, a couple weeks back, he had put a good amount of complexity into it with like extra Nahiri and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, this is really like a big 6/6 Squadron Hawk, right? Like that's what it is. And it's a deck that like for all its card power is really just trying to brain you with a creature. And if you can kind of fight against that, like it's obviously doing other stuff, right? Because it's capable of drawing a bunch of cards and it's capable of tutoring. But like its actual way of beating you is by attacking you with the 6/6. If you can kind of line your answers up against that.
Well, no, its card advantage is prohibitively strong. The real thing it does is outgrind you. You just have so much card advantage. But who cares? It's just slow. This is a deck with tons of 5s. And, tons of 5s. And not a small amount of 4s either.
Yeah.
So, like, the format being so much about, like, Mono Red kills you on turn 4, Breach kills you on turn 4, Inverters virtual kill you on 4, really kill you on 5.
Yeah, I mean, Breach and Mono Red can both win on 3 with their, like, if they're unopposed also.
In a good scenario. But I'm talking just like the normal case. Like, It's just not very unrealistic.
If you had to rerun the tournament, you said you'd play Breach?
Well, no. I knew going in I would play Breach if I prepared a ton. If I had a lot of practice, I might play Breach. But if I were to just go again, even with no practice, I'd still just play Inverter.
Yeah. Inverter
it's boring, but I think
it's a saucy deck
for now. Awesome, dude. Well, it was great seeing you this past weekend and seeing Pioneer go a little crazy.
Yep, same, of course. I'll try to get another one soon.
Congrats to Corey for awesome showing, winning. Obviously that's awesome. And William Jensen, obviously, it's not even like you're not even impressed anymore.
Well,
it's just like, yeah, of course. Why would he not finish second?
William Jensen
Baby Huey
is in a class by himself. He is the only player in the history of Magic the Gathering to top 8 a Pro Tour or Players Tour in 4 different decades.
And that's a stat that's actually near and dear to my heart. I was the first to do it in 3.
Yeah.
So he got there first on the 4, which means I need to get there first on the 5.
Oh, well, you got to hit 4 before you hit 5, Patrick.
Yeah, but I got a decade.
Yeah. Well, I would be the first person to cheer you on at hitting 4. So let's see what happens.
All right, dude. Awesome. See you next week.
Bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost so out of